In 1896, the Kingdom of Italy was a rising colonial power. They had modern artillery, machine guns, and generals trained in the finest academies of Europe. Their opponent? An East African empire that the rest of the world looked down upon as primitive. The Italians expected a walkover. They expected a parade. Instead, in a single morning, the Italian army didn't just lose, they were annihilated. Nearly 7,000 soldiers dead, generals captured, a modern European army wiped off the map by an African emperor who understood warfare better than they did. This wasn't a skirmish, it was the Battle of Adwa. And it all started with a single deliberate mistranslation in a legal document. Here is how Emperor Menelik II used a piece of paper to bait a trap, and 100,000 warriors to snap it shut. To understand the bloodbath, you have to understand the trickery. The year is 1889. The scramble for Africa is at its peak. Britain, France, and Italy are carving up the continent like a cake. But Ethiopia, led by the shrewd Emperor Menelik II, stands in their way. Menelik was no isolationist. He was a diplomat. He signed the Treaty of Wuchale with Italy to secure friendship and trade. But the Italians tried to pull one fast one. Article 17. In the Amharic version, which Menelik read, it said Ethiopia could use Italy's assistance for foreign relations if they wanted to. It was a choice. But in the Italian version, it said Ethiopia must use Italy. One word changed the meaning from friendship to submission. Italy believed they had just tricked Menelik into signing away his empire. They declared Ethiopia a protectorate. They underestimated two people, Menelik and his brilliant wife, Empress Taytu Betul. When Menelik discovered the deception in 1893, he didn't just complain. He famously declared, "I have no intention of being an indifferent spectator if the distant powers hold the idea of dividing up Africa." He tore up the treaty. Italy was humiliated. General Oreste Baratieri, the governor of Italian Eritrea, was ordered to march south. His orders were simple: bring back the emperor in chains. The Italians assumed they would face a disorganized mob with spears. This was their first fatal mistake. Menelik II had spent years buying modern rifles, Mosin Nagants and Remingtons, from Russia and France. Menelik beat the war drums, and the response was historic. Regional kings, who usually fought each other, united under the imperial crown. Ras Makonnen, the father of the future Haile Selassie. Ras Alula Engida, the Lion of Asmara, arguably the greatest African general of the 19th century. They all came. But an army marches on its stomach. Moving 100,000 people across mountainous terrain without modern trucks is a logistical nightmare. This was Empress Taytu's war as much as Menelik's. She organized a supply chain of food and water that kept the massive army alive for months. By February 1896, the two armies were staring at each other near the peaks of Adwa. The Italians were dug in. Menelik knew attacking fortified machine gun positions was suicide. So He used intelligence. He planted a double agent, Awalum Haregot.
Awalum was an Ethiopian patriot posing as an Italian guide. He told General Baratieri that Menelik's army was starving, that disease was rampant, and that half the troops had deserted. It was a lie. But Baratieri, desperate for a victory, believed it. On the night of February 29th, a leap year, Baratieri made his move. He split his army into 4 brigades, totaling about 17,000 men with 56 artillery guns. His plan was to take the high ground under the cover of darkness. But the Italian maps, were wrong. The Italian general Albertone was supposed to hold a reserve line, but due to a sketching error on the map, the hill he was told to occupy was actually miles deeper into enemy territory. He marched his 4,000 men straight into the jaws of the Ethiopian army. As the sun rose on March 1st, St. George's Day, Albertone realized he was alone. And then the ground began to shake, not from an earthquake, but from the charge of 100,000 men. The Ethiopians didn't just charge blindly, they used a pincer movement. Ras Alula blocked the retreat, the Oromo cavalry swept the sides, and the Imperial Guard, the Kabur Zabanya, hit the center. Albertone's brigade was wiped out by 9 a.m. The other Italian generals, Aramondi and Debormida, tried to come to the rescue, but the terrain separated them. They were fighting 3 separate battles against a unified ocean of force. Even the Empress was on the battlefield. Historical accounts confirm Taytu Betul stood near the artillery, encouraging the gunners and commanding her own contingent of 5,000 soldiers to plug gaps in the defense. By noon, the Italian formation had disintegrated. It wasn't a retreat, it was a rout. Generals Aramondi and Debormida were killed in action. Baratieri, the man who promised to bring Menelik back in chains, fled the battlefield, leaving his troops behind. The numbers were staggering. In one day, Italy lost nearly 7,000 men killed or wounded. Another 3,000 were taken prisoner. They lost all their artillery. They lost 11,000 rifles. To put that in perspective, Italy lost more soldiers in a few hours at Adwa than they lost during the entire duration of the Italian Wars of Unification. Menelik had won, but he didn't sack Rome. He simply demanded recognition. The Treaty of Addis Ababa was signed months later. The text was clear this time, no mistranslations. Ethiopia was a sovereign, independent nation. The victory at Adwa kept Ethiopia free, while the rest of Africa fell to colonization. It became a beacon of hope for black people worldwide, from Harlem to Jamaica. But history has a cruel memory. The humiliation of Adwa scarred the Italian psyche so deeply that 40 years later, Benito Mussolini launched a brutal invasion of Ethiopia specifically to avenge this defeat. He didn't invade for resources. He invaded to erase the shame of 1896. He captured the statue of the Lion of Judah and took it to Rome. But even then, they couldn't break the spirit Adwa created. The occupation was short-lived. The emperor returned. The lion went home. The Battle of Adwa proved that technology and arrogance are no match for unity and strategy. It remains the only time in the 19th century that an African nation defeated a European power in a full-scale war and forced them to say sorry.